Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies and I'm the host of this weekly podcast. This week, Martin Ross joins the podcast to look into the latest news in the in-flight and in-ship rights sector, following Iris Sports Media's acquisition of Olympic rights in a 4-game cycle. We'll look at what that means for a sector long dominated by IMG's Sport24 channels and what we might expect to see going forward. Then Matthew Glendinning provides a detailed synopsis of his story this week about English Premier League clubs mulling over a proposal for a central sponsorship model to exploit perimeter advertising rights. And as usual, we'll wrap up with a quick look at what's coming our way in the weeks and months ahead. All this is coming your way very shortly. But before we start, we'd love to have your input on this or on any other Sport Business Podcast episode. Please leave us your feedback and a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms, and let us know if you like what you're hearing and what you'd like to know more about. So without further ado, let's move straight on to our first topic for the day. Once again, I'm back in the hot seat with Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Sport Business News, who's going to lead off this week's podcast with headline news. The headline news that Iris Sports Media has nabbed the in-flight and in-ship rights to the Olympics through to 2032. Huge news, Martin. But first, the niceties. What has been on your agenda since we spoke last week?
Yes, I might want to maybe remind any of our English rugby fans listening to the podcast that they might not have won at Murrayfield on Saturday. That was a fun day out. Yeah, it's quite an experience, Murrayfield. I've been I don't know how many times, maybe 50 times. I don't know, I've been a lot. But you kind of, even still, you get impressed by the setup of, I know we kind of hammer the UK sports experience versus maybe the North American one, but just sitting there up high in the stands, looking at the Piper on the roof, looking at snow-topped mountains, looking at, the players as they come out, the flames, the anthems, the huge big flags on the pitch, pipe band. It's pretty impressive. And yes, they won. So that was a bonus.
Well, I think it was probably quite impressive to see you there in your tartan trousers. What did people around you say?
Well, if you're up here, I was told by friends that wasn't impressive. I should have been wearing a kilt, but I deemed it slightly too cold to wear a kilt. So, and plus, if there's wind, then kilt becomes a dangerous item of clothing. So, yes, it was very much a trousers day. But it was good. I've been enjoying that. I've been enjoying the Winter Olympics. I know that we have discussed a couple of times about some of the sponsors. There's a couple of other bits and bobs that we've seen on the broadcast, and Sophie Vumar of the IOC mentioned this week in our press conferences. So, yeah, the kiss and cry zone at the figure skating has a bit of subtle sponsor integration, which is Procter & Gamble's Puffs. I thought Puffs were crisps. Puffs are apparently tissues. So the Puffs tissues have been, which is quite cool. They put them where they sit so that if they lose, they can have some tissues, or if they win, they can have some tissues. Either way.
That is product placement, isn't it? Which
it is, yeah. So it's that kind of subtle integration to try and reward top sponsors. It's a program under a lot of scrutiny. We've written about that this week. There was one day, I think, where they plonked a Powerade bottle beside it, but I'm not entirely convinced it was meant to be there. So that's sort of made its entry. We talked about the Powerade sort of drinks. At the snow sports, there's also been Allianz kind of sponsored readiness zones where the athletes have been getting ready. TCL has sponsored the big screens where the athlete moment, which was introduced at Tokyo, where if after your race or your event, you can connect with your family on a big screen. So yeah, it's for the geeks among us watching the Olympics. It's quite nice just to see these little things that they are slowly integrating. And Anne-Sophie was saying this week that they will continue to do so. So watch this space at future Olympics. We'll see more and more of this, I think, as it comes, but while respecting the kind of general field of play rules.
Yeah, it's sort of marketing by stealth, isn't it? Who knows what it'll be like in 3 or 4 editions. But anyway, let's move on to the topic at hand, which, despite the fact that it's not really something that's at the forefront of people's minds, has always really interested me. The whole notion of in-flight and in-ship rights. I was explaining this to my husband last night, and he was gobsmacked at the notion of it. It just seems like a really odd thing. And neither of us have ever actually seen this in a plane. So can you give us an explainer on in-flight and in-ship rights, ship and plane rights? Tell us about them.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those little industries within an industry, which is quite fun just to learn more about. When we say in-flight and in-ship rights, it means a agency, and this has largely been IMG over the years, comes in and puts down a number to secure in-flight and in-ship rights globally. Often it excludes the US because they have a different system. We'll talk about that later, but US domestic flights, exclude. But it means that they can then create a product or to sell to airlines and cruise lines. In IMG's case, they've created channels that can then be shown so that if you're on the entertainment systems, so that if you're a passenger, you can sit and watch live sport. It hasn't really been on demand yet, but that's coming on your flight. And it's becoming more and more kind of known about. Certainly, maybe even anecdotally, if you look at Instagram or if there's a big sports moment, you quite often see these videos now of everybody on a plane all watching whoever it may be, Alcaraz winning an Australian Open or whatever. So it's getting a bit out there in the ether, but IMG has owned this space. So it developed Sport24 in 2012, which was a linear and is a linear channel. They developed a second channel in 2016 called Sport24 Extra, and they aligned with Panasonic's Avionics Corporation, which certainly then was very much the complete dominant player in the kind of in-flight entertainment systems, so that they could basically put Sport24 channels within the Panasonic's entertainment system tech, and airlines could, have the option of buying this as a service. Back then, Wi-Fi nowhere near good enough to sort of entertain streaming. Yeah, they developed a complete kind of monopoly on rights. I think in 2024, they say that over 10 million passengers watched their content in flight. That's an IMG figure, so imagine they've all been counted up one by one. The monopoly that they have: English Premier League, UEFA Club Comps, golf majors, tennis, Grand Slams, Rugby World Cup, NBA, Formula One, ICC cricket. NFL is in flight only, so there's a slight quirk there. It's all produced from the Stockley Park facility of IMG, which is near Heathrow. And there's a distribution. If you go on the Sport24 website, you'll see how widely it's distributed among airlines and cruise lines. It's kind of everywhere. And it has sort of thrown up some fun stories over the years. I did one in 2021 about international waters, which just kind of reminded me of that bit. I don't know for any Simpsons fans when they start gambling in international waters. But TUI, the holiday operator, got into, hot water with IMG and FIFA for basically broadcasting unencrypted ARD and ZDF feed via Astra satellites of the World Cup, Men's World Cup in 2018 and the Women's World Cup in 2019. Without going all the way into that conversation, that ARD and ZDF's availability has kind of been an issue for the industry previously, with beIN having, if we go back 10 or 15 years, having taken issue with it. Anyway, long story short, they were ordered to pay €365,000 plus interest, I believe, to IMG. FIFA was involved in the case as well to try and defend the value of these rights. And one other slightly left field one was last year. It was a Trans-Manche ferry going across the Manche from Dieppe to Newhaven. And I'm going to specify that this wasn't on Sport24, just before we get any complaints, but they were showing F1. I think they were maybe docked. So they were showing F1 somehow in the bar, but lots of families and kids watching it. And then this made the news in the UK that after the F1, there was slightly more adult content that followed, and there was uproar, as you can imagine. People were screaming in the cabin, and yes, that was caused a bit of controversy. Don't think that's related to any of the people we'll be talking about today in terms of their services, but yes, it can be quite a funny topic as well.
It is a funny topic, and like I said, I haven't watched any live sport on a plane, and I do question people who pay all that money to go on a cruise and sit inside watching TV.
Sounds like the sort of thing I would do. Then you'd have to have small talk with the passengers.
Yeah, why bother going on a cruise
to
stay in your room? Wow. Well, we're here to talk about the major development in this space this week. Tell us about that.
So yeah, I suppose it is and it isn't big news. It's maybe the start of big news. Iris Sport Media, which was set up by Joris Francini, Flores Weiss, Luca Baldanza, all ex-IMG guys. They have secured the in-flight and in-ship rights to the Olympics for the next 4 games. These have been shown on Sport24 since 2012, so since the beginning of the tech, really. They are planning to develop an app, no doubt. It's not in place yet, so for the current Milano Cortina games, which they have the rights to, all they're going to really do, or all they're doing now, is selling highlights which will be shown after the game on airlines and cruise lines, etc. So this is their first move in the space, but they've started to target the rights, which is really interesting. And the reason they've started to target the rights is they see a kind of the rapid technological evolution, which we'll go into, has lowered the cost of entry for people to come into this market. And I explained a bit about Panasonic's avionics tech, which IMG had partnered with because of the improvement in technology around low latency Wi-Fi. They see this, and others see this area as really opening up. So they've decided to go in and acquire the rights to the Olympics up until Brisbane. They will put in place a fully live, what they'll do is either quite often aggregators get involved in actually selling onto the airlines, or it will be an airline maybe develops whatever it is in-flight entertainment is with streaming. So by LA, you'll be able to watch live Olympics that is essentially being sold by Iris. So it's one property. Let's see how it goes further. They're now weighing up really how deep they go in, weighing up different models. As I explained, IMG still has a massive monopoly on this market, but I think we could start to be seeing a little bit of, I was going to say a sea change. Why not? A sea change. The start of a sea change, ripples in the water, as to others maybe coming in and having a look at this space.
Well, I was going to ask you if this is going to be a 2-horse race now. In a very nerdy way, I've been keeping spreadsheets of all the deals of pretty much everything around the world for 2 decades now. And my in-ship spreadsheet has about 60 deals, and all but 8 of them, I think, are for IMG Sport24, and some of the others are, as you said, the domestic US deals. So they really have dominated the space. It's a big move for Iris. What do you foresee? What do you think is going to happen? Will Iris move more into the space? And also, you mentioned that IMG does it all through its Stockley Park facilities. They've got a lot of investment there. Is Iris going to have to do that? I mean, you can't just walk into a space and run with it. You need to invest a lot, don't you?
They are the process of acquiring rights as a kind of first step. I suppose the Olympics is quite a good one in that the Winter Olympics don't have the same pressure as getting Summer Olympics out live. There's not as much interest. The tech has to follow, the production has to follow. They have to decide whether they sort of ramp up in terms of staff, whether they market in the same way, albeit if you're not launching channels, do you have to market channels yourself? I suppose is a slightly different setup. But yeah, I mean, horses, I don't know, maybe it's a good and a bad analogy. I'm not aware of any horse racing being acquired by Sport24 in the past. Although if you're gambling live on horse racing on a plane, then you're maybe in quite a bad place. There have been others. I mean, Pitch came in and got the F1 rights in 2017. Yep. IMG, Sport24 have since come back and recovered them in 2023. There was Global Eagle Entertainment, which I think has since been rebranded as Anuvu, which is essentially a kind of maritime entertainment firm, which that could be all sorts of things. It did a sort of dabble. I believe, Six Nations I don't believe is shown by Sport24. I think Pitch has some involvement in Six Nations, making it available on cruise lines currently. So yeah, we have one big sort of Clydesdale horse and maybe some others. I wouldn't describe them as Shetland ponies, but others kind of trying to join the race. What's really interesting to me is that there was a recent ITT for premium sports rights that I believe neither IMG nor Iris got it. Now, it's a bit of a teaser there. I don't actually know. I'll be honest. We don't know yet who's got it, but it's raising the possibility of maybe a kind of like a global streamer. And I'm not going to mention names because I don't know actually who's got the rights. So it would be wrong to say who or speculate who. But that's kind of interesting because you have in the States, the way the system works, I believe you have ESPN and NBC for the domestic flights, who I think can essentially beam up signals from the Earth into the planes in the States. So you have the scenario where a global streamer could maybe look to do that for some of their content, and it would be a drop in the ocean to them, I suppose, the rights cost as a nice kind of add-on. So whether it's agencies, whether it's, as I say, other parties that we might not expect maybe to have gotten into the space internationally, there is the first signs of genuine competition for the first time ever, really. Pitch did have a bit of a stab, but yeah, it's potentially becoming an interesting space.
And this competition is largely being driven, I would guess, by new technology, driven by low Earth orbit satellite technology, which has been spearheaded by SpaceX, Amazon, OneWeb. How quickly is this high-speed, low-latency Wi-Fi being deployed across aircraft? It's coming quickly, isn't it?
You had me at low orbit space technology.
LEO satellite technology. No, I looked it
Wow.
up because I've read about it. And it's just, when they put Starlink or whatever over Ukraine or over Iran to provide
Hmm.
internet when it's turned off and things like that, it generally is that low Earth orbit. And so you're not having the signals bounce, millions of miles up into the galaxy.
Yeah.
It's more reliable and low latency, as
Um,
I just mentioned.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think we're at kind of an inflection point for this industry in terms of the sort of old linear channels versus whether the
Mm.
streaming gets to a point where it can really open up the market. As an example of that, well, here in the UK, Virgin Atlantic last year started to develop with Starlink, which is a satellite internet provider, looking to become the first airline here in the UK to provide high-speed, low-latency Wi-Fi across its fleet. Now, that would enable live streaming of sports because the Wi-Fi would be solid enough. However, that's not to be due to come in until the end of 2027. So these are the kind of things that Iris and others are looking at. I don't want to kind of oversimplify this as kind of IMG's old linear channels versus disruptors coming in looking to develop apps. IMG are very much in that space already as well, and aware that, as you can imagine, they have been working with Qatar Airways, so that one of their clients. So last June, Qatar Airways has kind of Starlink connected aircraft. They've launched a streaming service with IMG. The first time that Sport24 has been available beyond the kind of in-flight, embedded into an in-flight entertainment system. It's a web player. So then Qatar Airways, if you go on your mobile, your tablet, your laptop, you can load up, use the Wi-Fi and watch Sport24 on there. So yeah, as I say, I wouldn't want to really sort of line up IMG's model versus being completely different to everybody else's. I think it's slightly more complicated than that, but I think we're at the start of a real change in terms of, in the midst of a real change in terms of how these kind of services are being deployed, are being monetized, the costs are coming down, and it's opening it up for other players in the industry, which, yeah, is a threat to IMG's Sport24 business. Of course it is, but keeps it interesting and is good news for the industry.
Yeah, well, competition is always a good thing, isn't it? This new competition, I was looking at the rights fees that have been paid for this tranche of rights, and it's not huge money, is it? Do you think it's going to change now? Is it going to grow? Is the rights holders going to be looking to get significantly higher fees? And also there was the impact of COVID in the whole sector, wasn't there? I suppose people weren't flying and
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was. I mean, it seems to have recovered since. If you look
Yeah.
at, I mean, certainly if you look at the number of, as I say, the number of airlines and cruise lines that are taking Sport24 would suggest that it's a pretty healthy industry again. But it was decimated. I mean, 10% of total planes offering Sport24 had it compared to pre-COVID. Pretty much no cruise lines had passengers, so it was just crew. I don't know where they were going, but wherever they were going, they were watching ICC cricket or Rugby World Cup.
Well, not much else to do.
No, well, exactly. So, yeah, but I mean, the units are on the rise, audiences are on the rise. So, and Iris and others wouldn't be interested right now if they didn't see it as a growth market. Rights fee wise is really interesting. Yeah, it is quite small. I mean, I would describe it as not on the same level as even kind of betting video rights, which are also cleared globally. I think the biggest ever deals, you're probably looking at an NFL or a English Premier League, which would be maybe mid to high single-digit million figures, euros per year. A lot of the deals, even for premium rights, are around 6 figures per year for a rights guarantee. So you've had a single buyer in IMG who's been able to effectively dictate the price because nobody else has been around to buy the rights. So now it depends. I mean, does IMG defend its space and double down on rights investment in order to protect this impressive portfolio they have? How big does Iris go in? Do other players with essentially much bigger pockets, and we've hinted at them in terms of who they could be from a streaming point of view, do they come in? I think it's a good time for rights holders, though. Yeah, I mean, listen, we're talking about, in bigger picture, small values, but growth nonetheless. So it can only be good news if you're a rights holder sitting on a set of rights that are interesting enough for people to want to watch on a plane.
Well, good on Iris for injecting that competition. And haven't they been in the news quite a lot lately? And they've hired Gosia Borkowska from the Extra Classe. They acquired that agency in Latin America. They've done a lot for Cracks, I know, great name. No, they've done a lot in recent months, haven't they?
They're very busy. They're growing. They're certainly one of the agencies looking at Serie A, international rights. Serie A's inviting proposals from agencies at the moment, or has been, along with inviting private equity bids. So they are, but and they're going at it very much in a kind of agency 2.0, 3.0, whatever an agency should be now.
Well, I really enjoyed that, Martin. That's an area that not many people are familiar with, and I certainly wasn't. Interesting that we've got this turbulent period ahead of us. You told me to say that pun.
I did, but turbulent in a good way. Disruption. We like disruption.
We like disruption. We like competition.
Let's see where it lands.
Oh, and ding, ding, you win on that one. So we're going to wrap that up. Thank you, Martin. You'll be back later in the show to tell us about what you're looking at in the weeks ahead. We're going to take a short break now, and before we bring in Matthew Glendinning with some chat about English Premier League sponsorship. We'll be right back in just a moment.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sport business industry news and insight. I'm here now with Matthew Glendinning, our European sponsorship editor, who's back in London after his recent trip to Saudi Arabia. Matthew, tell us about that. Was that your first time? Why were you there? What did you see?
That was my first time, and full disclosure, I was invited by PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. One thing you should know about PIF is that they are called PIF and not PIF. I was quickly taught this. You should never call them PIF. They want to be called PIF. And I also learned that Dubai Sovereign Wealth Fund, which I've always called Mubadala, should be called Mubadala. In fact, they even ran campaigns to get people who weren't Arabic speaking to say it like that. But apart from the sort of these kind of small details, I found it really an exciting, fast-changing place. There are cranes dominating the skyline in parts of Riyadh, and also very beautiful, some desert landscapes by the Red Sea, which we were flown to, which oddly had some rather wonderful golf courses as well. So there's something for everyone, I guess. And without sort of preempting my article on PIF, I felt that what they do makes a lot of sense within the context of Saudi's economic transformation plan. And although this sounds all kind of corporate and like I've been sort of drinking the Kool-Aid, it's a country that is trying to change. And I mean, it needs to diversify its revenue. It can't live off oil forever. So I don't think there's any sort of agenda that, from that point of view, that I found it all difficult. And I really enjoyed it. I thought they're very courteous and fun people, actually. So I had quite a few laughs with some of them.
Great. I must say I'm a bit envious. I would like to have that experience, go to the Middle East.
Well, there's the World Cup coming
That's very
in
true.
8 years, 2034, and I think it's going to be good.
Sure.
I didn't realise it's quite a diverse country in the sense that it's ethnically quite diverse, and also just the way people present themselves. There's some people are very traditional, and some people are wearing really kind of smart linen suits. So it's a bit of everything, and even I have to say, even the women don't feel qualified to kind of say exactly what the situation was, but it seemed pretty relaxed.
That's on my bucket list to go to the Middle East, other than the Dubai airport, where I've been several times. But let's move on to the subject at hand. You are here to shed more light on a story you wrote this week about the English Premier League clubs mulling over a proposal for a central sponsorship model for a certain tranche of rights. Now, this was first reported by Sky News, and the 20 clubs in the league were presented with a new proposal at a shareholder meeting with plans to sell up to 60% of pitch side advertising that could potentially generate a projected overall revenue of, I think you said, £750 million a year. Now, further investigation by Sport Business has revealed that the inspiration for the plans is the massive deals to be found at the Champions League level. So now, how realistic is the comparison? And can the EPL clubs really decide to take a large bite out of the central sponsorship apple?
Yes, I think it would be some change really to put this into the proposition into context. League clubs currently sell their own pitchside LED inventory, and if they fail to do so, typically the lower tier clubs often sell their packages in tandem with Sport5 agencies. So the Sport5 agency will sell the extras, and you'll often see sort of betting company sponsors more than 2 or 3 often at clubs like Burnley or Sunderland. And that's how it's done. And of course, the bigger clubs in this way, they make much more than the smaller clubs. We all know that. But the disparity is very big. I mean, the big 4, if I can call them the big 4 in terms of sponsorship in Premier League, Liverpool, Man City, United and Arsenal, they make more than 300 million euros per season, whereas down at the bottom, you'd be looking in the low teens. So you could see that this might be attractive, particularly for the lower league clubs, because a little bit of maths that £750 million divided by 20 clubs is about £37.5 million each, which would be amazing, except that's not how it works, is that the bigger clubs there's no way they're going to vote that because they'd lose 60% of their inventory for £37.5 million. So they wouldn't want to do that. There'd have to be some sort of coefficient to skew who gets what. So it could be realistic if that coefficient, whatever, is negotiated. And I'll talk about that a bit later. But the other thing is also you have to bear in mind that there's already a central roster of central sponsors in the Premier League, currently 7, and the proposition is that would go up to 10. Those are Adobe, Barclays, Coca-Cola, EA Sports, Guinness, Microsoft, and Puma. The reason that this is such a change is that these rights do not, on the whole, include perimeter signage. So you won't see, in general, those brands around clubs when you're watching on TV, with some small exceptions, which is why those deals are worth in the sort of low 8 figures per year rather than the high 8 figures that you see at Champions League level. So when you factor all that in, you can see there's something there that would make sense.
But it seems extraordinary, really, that this is comparable to the Champions League revenue. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I mean, it's a national league versus a Europe-wide league with some of the biggest and most famous clubs in the world in that league, which aren't from the Premier League. The thing is that while the sponsors of the Champions League, they dominate European nights, that they don't share the inventory with any of the club sponsors, although obviously the clubs, they can still show their main shirt sponsor and their sleeve sponsor, etc. Although they dominate match day, there's not as much inventory. There'll be more matches in any Premier League season. And the Premier League, as much as it doesn't include some of those amazing clubs, has a great reach. Don't know the media data, but the reach is in some respects comparable. I think the other thing about the Champions League is, however, which is kind of taking the eye of the Premier League and also the advisors to the Premier League, is that those central rights have been bombing up in terms of value from 2023-24 to 2024-25. The increase is from €542 million to €727 million. Those increases were delivered by UEFA's outgoing sales agency team. But now, as we all know, relevant are now from 2027 onwards the new sales agents for the club competitions, and there's even more rights increases. So this kind of premium central inventory that attracts huge global brands really brings home big numbers, and Premier League could very realistically put itself in that bracket.
So the sums that you mentioned at the Champions League level are huge. But why is this happening now? Surely this has always been an option, this possibility to look at central deals.
Champions League has been the premium property for some time. Some of the pricing has gone up and going up a bit more, but it's in the last 20 years, it's been absolutely premium. But I think one thing that may be helping the clubs think a little differently is that from next season, the betting money will run out on the front of shirt. And I think we've already seen how betting sponsors are taking up LED even in the last few seasons, especially where some of the smaller clubs have inventory available because they don't just have the numbers of official partners from other sectors. But sometimes you see 3 or 4. In fact, there was one, I think there was a match where you had, I think it was Sunderland, where you had the shirt sponsor being a betting sponsor, the sleeve sponsor being a betting sponsor, plus 3 LED sponsors as well. And it could start to look very messy. This is just a supposition, I have to add, but it might look very messy if next season LED is just dominated by betting sponsors because they can't be on the shirt. And then if you think how much cleaner that would look if there were some really serious, impressive global partners on those boards instead of, I won't name names, but, some less well-known or reputable betting companies, that could be attractive. The other thought I had was, I don't really like to say this on a show that might be listened to by people in the industry from football and sponsorship, is that you'd probably cut back on your sales teams. I don't like to say that. If you're not selling all this extra inventory, you might not need quite so much staff. So it could be a more streamlined process. Perhaps that could be a reason why, along with just the eye-catching numbers that we're seeing at Champions League level.
It's interesting what you say about the possibility of the boards being filled up with betting sponsors. And that made me think of a predictive market segment that we talked about in a couple of podcasts ago. And I'd never really heard of it until you talked about it. And now it's everywhere. I hear it on the radio. I see it I see things about predictive marketing.
It is everywhere. And also, I have to say that the state authorities in the US are putting up quite a fight. I think they really don't like the fact that they're cutting them out of their right to regulate sports betting. So there may be a bigger scrap than I imagined, but we'll see who comes out on top of that.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a future podcast, I'm sure.
Yes.
But let's go back to the topic at hand, the £750 million question then. Is it going to happen or is it just talk?
Right. I think it's the bigger clubs are the ones that have least to gain. And while they still keep 40% of their inventory for their big ticket deals, so the front of shirt sponsor will need LED inventory, the kit supplier will need LED. You can't sell a package without it. They're making so much from the existing operation. They would really need this income skewed towards them, and I'm not sure how that would work. But I've had a little dig into how the UEFA financial distribution model works. I can't see this model working for the Premier League, and I'll tell you why. So for the Champions League and the Europa League, you get 27.5% of distribution just based on your participation. Whatever the overall revenue is, UEFA accumulates. 27.5% goes back to the clubs for participation. 37.5% goes back to the clubs for performance. So if you do well, you make a lot more if you win. And then there's something called the value pillar, which is 35% of that total. And the value pillar combines a 10-year UEFA club coefficient ranking and the value of the club's domestic TV market. So that rewards the bigger clubs. But of course, the Premier League clubs are all in the same TV market. The coefficient ranking perhaps could help tell a story and help Spurs actually over the last few seasons.
Will anything help Spurs?
Well, maybe well, that's another question indeed. Much deeper question.
Yeah.
Maybe the so-called value pillar might need to be worked out, and maybe a bit more goes to the big clubs. One of the reasons I can see it happening is that it's kind of been staring football in the face for quite a while. And it is sort of model that although US sports tend to have official partners sort of along these lines, maybe the board signage isn't perhaps so regulated and ordered as European football. But perhaps the anomaly is actually the way we do things now rather than the way the Champions League works out things, which is, newer but cleaner and probably more lucrative. I don't know how much influence each of the big clubs would have on the smaller clubs. And of course, the smaller clubs come in and out because they get relegated, but you only need a 2/3 majority to pull this off. So in one season, I don't know. My guess is conservatively, I say status quo. I think it's a great thing to talk about. I think it probably will happen one day when the numbers become so you just can't know all the numbers. But for now, I think it's still something that could go either way. And for that reason, when such a dramatic change, I think you need something to be going a lot worse, something to be going a lot better. And I just don't think that is quite there yet.
Well, to wrap this up, another interesting topic that we've covered today. You said it's at the proposal stage.
Yeah.
What's the timeline? What happens next?
We don't know. So we do know that nothing has been decided. We know a bit more about who's proposed it, but this is all very kind of stuff. They don't really want this leaked out. The fact is 3 clubs did leak it out to Sky News, but this isn't necessarily stuff they want the whole media poring over, because they could suggest that media tends to portray a lot of these changes as greed or ignoring local perhaps interests or whatever, or smaller club interests, although in this case it could work in favour of small clubs. So I don't think we'll be hearing that much sort of publicly about. I don't think there is an official deadline as far as I know. It's a proposal, it's been made and people are talking about it. So I would say, but I would have thought one thing is a lot of the central sponsors for the Premier League have deals that go on for at least another 3 years. So it's not going to happen probably for another 3 years unless Premier League sort of says, sorry guys, ripping up those contracts and starting all the new ones. So whatever happens, I think it'll take 2 or 3 years more for it to be implemented if it does get the money.
Well, watch this space then, and I'm sure you'll be all over it if and when something happens. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
I assume you're recovered from your trip to Saudi and you're back at your desk getting everything done.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, Catherine, do you think the Canadian ice hockey team, men's or the women's, have a chance of medaling? Well, they'll medal, but getting the gold.
That is a loaded question. The women's final, as we're going to talk about later in this podcast, it starts in about an hour and a half. So we'll see, because they did get shellacked by the US women 5-0 in the preliminary rounds. So if they can pull it off, that'll be extraordinary. The men, I think, have possibly a better chance. Who knows? NHL players all back in the arena. Exciting. We'll see. It tends to be the most watched television broadcast of the year in Canada. So there's going to be millions of people bunking off work today to watch. So we'll talk about it.
Well, enjoy that
next week, I'm
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah, no, I will. Thank you very much. And we will see you very soon in a podcast. Thank you, Matthew. We're going to take a short break now before we come back with Martin Ross again to talk about what's happening in the weeks and months ahead.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry. Delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to this final section of the Sport Business Podcast, where we take a look at notable events and developments coming our way in the near future. Now, Martin has come back on the line with me to tell me about what's grabbing his attention this month, but I am going to start, as is rightly so, with comment about the Olympic women's hockey final, which starts in an hour and 25 minutes. Now, of course, it's Canada versus the US. Women's hockey has been in the Winter Olympics since 1998, and Canada and the US have won every gold and silver medal since then, except in 2006 when Sweden took silver. Canada are the defending champions. They won their 5th title in 2022 in Beijing. And this is traditionally, the men's and the women's finals are traditionally the most watched television broadcasts in Canada each year. Just as a note there, the men's final in 2010 drew 16.6 million views, an average audience of 16.6 million, which, as far as I know, is the most watched broadcast in Canadian television history. It was across about 5 or 6 channels, but still, that's extraordinary, isn't it? I remember that very well because I was in England and we got up at 3 a.m. to watch it live. It was a big event.
So when is it? Well, we're recording this on a Thursday. People will be listening on a Friday or beyond, so it will have happened. But anyway, it's at 6:10 p.m. UK. So what's that, 10 past 10 in the morning, West Coast, sorry.
West Coast, 10 past 10, so 1:10 or so in the afternoon. The interesting thing is that the Prime Minister, he's made a note that he'll be watching it live. He'll be out on the West Coast and he'll be watching it live. And a lot of companies have given their employees time off to spend 2 hours watching the women's hockey game, and they'll do the same for the men's. So it is sort of a national event. And the women's final, the Canadian women have their star player back, Poulin. In fact, she was injured in the last game, but she played very well. But they did get skunked. I know you're not like that.
I don't know
Canadian
I know what it means, but
skunked.
I don't know.
They got shellacked, skunked, crushed 5-0 in the preliminary round. Horse, there you go.
Horsed.
So they're facing that. The US has been dominant. They have outscored their rivals in this tournament by 31 goals? 31 goals to 1, I think. So they're facing a really dominant rival. So we'll find out what happens in a couple hours' time. But I do expect it to be another huge audience. When Canada won the gold medal in the last Olympics, the Canadian women, the audience was 2.7 million, which was the most watched event of the Olympics. I think the timing was good. It was at 11 p.m. Eastern time here. Got 3.54 million on NBC in the States. So it's a very important game for the rights holders, that's for sure. Brings in the viewers.
And then at the start of the working day tomorrow or Friday, we have, I don't want to give you a Scottish word here, a stushy between yourself and our Finnish producer Lumi, but I believe Canada are playing Finland in the men's semi-final tomorrow morning, about 20 to 9 Vancouver time, I believe. Any predictions?
I haven't really followed it that closely. I've just been too sort of gobsmacked by, I said that second time I've used that word in this podcast, by the heated rivalry hockey series that is the new Canadian cultural offering. So I haven't actually followed the live action that much.
The quarters
Finland
were good.
have a good chance.
Yeah, I watched the quarters yesterday. It was good. Overtime goal.
Finland didn't. I think Lumi said that Finland won the gold medal last time around. But they're a strong opponent, and all will be revealed tomorrow.
Excellent. Big night of curling ahead for me, so the fun never stops up here.
Right. Well, what are you looking ahead to, or do you have any other comments about other business?
My only other comment, I believe, would be a slightly niche quiz question that I have for you. I know you like Portuguese broadcast tidbits. How much does the Portuguese Prime Minister, does Portugal have a Prime Minister? Yes, it does. How much does the Portuguese Prime Minister pay for his Sport TV subscription? Would be my question.
Well, That's an unfair question because I do know the answer because I think you publicised that amongst our
I did. So the
office
government
thread.
is paying €20,000 for access to sport TV between now and 2028. I'd love to understand how this works because it's not Horeca. It's not. They're not going to be inviting people in. Is it because it's multiple users? So the way it breaks down, this was reported by Correo de Manhã. What's that? Tomorrow's newspaper? Right?
Correo de Manhã, the morning news.
The morning news. So this is a sum that the government pays NOS. So I imagine NOS is carrying the Sport TV channels between now and October 2028 so that they can watch it at 7 points within the Sao Bento Palace, the official residence of the Prime Minister, and at 1 point in the Assembly of the Republic. So they've all got to really gather around one TV in the Assembly of the Republic by the sounds of it. Sport TV obviously has Portuguese league rights, Champions League rights, English Premier League, etc. So the payment is 1,170 this year. Then 26 and 27, they're going to get stung with €7,000. And then 2028, they're going to have to pay €4,680 to NOS, including VAT. Corresponds to a monthly charge of €73 per point. I don't understand that. It is, quite frankly, refreshing to see that they're not using dodgy sticks in the Portuguese government. I was trying to work out, I know that the Welsh office spent £5,715 on a Sky TV subscription between May 2010 and June 2011. So it turns out it's quite an expensive place to watch. Although all of these government and parliament buildings have bars. They used to have a bar at my secondary school, believe it or not.
Only in Scotland?
No, it was in England. It was in Warwick. I remember you would go up and you'd have to see the teacher to put some homework in the pigeonhole, whatever, to meet the teacher. And I remember they used to pull back the door and you'd see this smoky bar and they're all having pints at like 11:15 in the morning.
Wow.
Possibly not watching Sky. But anyway, good to know that politics in Portugal and the UK is so alive that they're all just watching live sport.
Well, I was going to say, it makes you wonder what they do all day if they're watching football.
Yeah, but at least it's legal.
Bar.
So yay for
legal.
no piracy in politics.
That's right. Well,
that we're aware of. Although, however, Catherine, I believe if the Portuguese Prime Minister, if he enters SB Podcast 30 at the checkout for his Sport TV subscription, then that should bring it down to €14,000 a year. So everybody loves a bargain.
Well, you heard it here. I hope he's listening down there in Lisbon to the latest offer. Thank you, Martin, for your double input today. You were on in the first section to talk about in-flight, in-ship rights, which I found particularly illuminating. And thanks to Matthew Glendinning as well. And we will be back again next week with more on the Sport Business Podcast. To our listeners, if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. And as always, if you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. Please don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. And watch for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, also leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, and for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.